Hey, so welcome back to the Praxis Report.
Welcome, John. Welcome. Great to be back.
Yeah, so we had a big item on the news last week was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was invited to give a lecture to the American Congress. Uh, and this was a real doozy. This was a real insane speech. What did you think of it?
Well, I think it was insane for a number of reasons. First and foremost, it was insane because this prime minister is under an arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court at The Hague in the
Right,
Netherlands. So, if he was, for example, giving such a speech or traveling around in Italy or Spain or France or any European state that's a member of the International Criminal Court, and most civilized countries in the world are members of the International Criminal Court, he'd be picked up and
right,
he'd be arrested,
right.
and prosecutions would be initiated
Right. So
immediately.
it was a very brazen, defiant decision by U.S. Congress to invite a man to speak and to give him this standing ovation when they know that he is accused of genocide, apartheid, and war crimes, and he actually is under arrest.
I have to review all of the war crimes covered by the arrest warrant
Right.
and prosecution. I would think it would be either some sort of mass killing, if not genocide, or because there's a continuum of potential criminality in
Right.
the conduct of the
Well,
war.
it's fascinating because Netanyahu has spoke at Congress a couple times before. I think the last time was when Obama was president, and he was speaking in order to get America to try to go to war with Iran. And in doing so, Netanyahu he comes to the U.S. Congress, and he's just it almost just is a sign of how our political system has degenerated into this barbaric spectacle where a man who is a war criminal is given this reception and this rollout where he's treated as a hero while the rest of the world recognizes that this man is a criminal.
Yeah, that and both the theatrics of it and the fact that in the last go around where Netanyahu addressed the Congress, as I recall it, Obama didn't invite him, and he came uninvited,
Came
uh,
uninvited.
and which raises all sorts of, again, these very these it breaks protocol and raises all sorts of legal questions because foreign policy is supposed to be conducted by the executive branch.
Well, he came uninvited last time because it was in the middle of negotiations between Obama and other countries negotiating a nuclear deal with Iran. And Netanyahu came for this explicit purpose of trying to derail the nuclear peace deal in
Right.
order to get Congress to go to war with Iran.
Right, which in our system is not the way that foreign policy is supposed to be conducted. The executive. That's why we have an executive. That's why we elect a president to conduct our foreign policy. And
Right.
if that's contradicted by sub officials, Congress people, or a governor who decides, if we're at war with a country and a governor decides to make peace with the country, obviously we'd have
Well,
not only.
it raises horrible questions too about the idea of the Israel lobby and the power of the Israel lobby to undermine a sitting president and to bring a foreign leader to our government. And to this foreign leader is trying to try to get America to go to war on behalf of his country,
Yeah.
to undermine our own policies. So it almost is like an anti-Semitic trope, but being played out in real life.
Yeah, an anti-Semitic. That's well stated. All of this raises, the classic anti-Semitic tropes, as you put it. I mean, the whole idea of Jewry historically, where when anti-Semitism was really at its peak, during World War II, the post-World War II era, Jews, the sort of the norm, or the conventional wisdom, is, as it were. Was that Jews should stay out of the news, that
Yeah.
Jews wanted to become an issue, that you didn't want the world talking about Jews or Jewry and Jewry's future. That was that was the approach, the conventional wisdom that taken by the Jewish community.
Yeah.
And here today, you have you have AIPAC controlling, it's like the influencing the entire electoral system.
Right. Right. Right.
With just a
Political
wash
bribery.
with huge amounts of money. All these reports of every AIPAC endorsed and financed candidate winning elections, giving substance to the trope that Jews are secretly controlling everything behind the scenes.
Well, and Netanyahu himself, he in his speech, he's very much this ideology of like this muscular Judaism, this strongman Zionism, where he doesn't want to be like the World War II era Jewry who was, in his view, afraid. He thinks that you have to be strong, powerful, militaristic, aggressive, and that's something that very much comes across when you listen to his speech. There's almost no country in the Middle East he doesn't want to be going to war with.
Yeah, and like you say, that's part of the vision of the new Jew versus the old Jew, which we're not going to walk silently into the gas chamber. We're going to be this strong figure,
right,
who fights everyone at all costs.
And except the contradiction there is that they're not fighting against Nazi Germany, they're fighting against a defenseless population in Gaza that is primarily refugees and women and children who are being massacred. And that's the new Jew, according to Netanyahu and his other Zionist sympathizers.
Well, you're getting into the facts of the matter. Why confuse fiction with actually what's taking place here?
Well,
and
what's
taking place here is, as you say, this sort of neo-colonial situation that we've seen played out in countless countries around the world. All of the African continent colonized, Asia colonized, and all of these nations using violence, national liberation, violent movements, all kinds of what you might call quote unquote terrorist violence, meaning yesterday's terrorist is today's freedom fighter.
Right.
To win liberation, whether you're talking about East Timor, whether you're talking about Algeria, whether you're talking about Zimbabwe, whether you're talking about the Republic of Ireland, you can go on and on. And all of these situations were characterized by the use of violence to achieve liberation. The only exception would be British India, Mahatma Gandhi's movement, nonviolent movement. Even that degenerated at times into terrorist violence against, the British. So, this is an old story being played out again and again and again throughout history. You're seeing it again, but just the conventional wisdom. No one talks about this.
Well, let's play a clip, because it's interesting you're saying that, because there was something Netanyahu started off his speech by describing the Palestinians versus the West in this apocalyptic terms of kind of good versus evil. So I'm going to see if I can cue up a clip and we can, react to what Netanyahu says here.
We meet today at a crossroads of history. Our world is in upheaval. In the Middle East, Iran's axis of terror confronts America, Israel, and our Arab friends. This is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between barbarism and civilization. It's a clash between those who glorify death and those who sanctify life. For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must.
Okay, so he's saying there it's not a clash of civilization. So he's going beyond. He's saying that Iran and the Palestinians aren't even civilized people. They're barbarians, is essentially his argument. It's a clash between civilization, which he describes as, Israel, America, and the West, against these essentially barbaric peoples. So he's describing it in dehumanistic terms, right? Dehumanizing terms, which allows him to justify mass slaughter of civilians in Gaza, because these are people that aren't civilized like us.
Right, and this has been their strategy since October 7th and prior to October 7th. We've talked about this on the Praxis report before. The profiling under the Genocide Convention, one of the signposts of genocide, or the warning signs of genocide, is just this: to profile the ethnic group, religious group, racial group that you want to annihilate as subhuman. And you do that by referring to them as animals, insects, or vegetation of some kind. This is what we saw happen in Rwanda, the Hutu genocide of the Tutsis, for which many Rwandan officials went to jail. As I would expect, many Likud officials will go to jail. Also, Hamas officials are also under indictment by the ICC, also for war crimes. But without getting into, whether or not it's fair that, taking sides, only Likud should go to jail, Hamas shouldn't go to jail. The way law works, anyone who commits war crimes goes to jail. They don't care, what political party you're in or what you're.
Well, it's also debatable because a lot of reporting has come out. Max Blumenthal, for example, at Gray Zone,
Right.
was one of the first who wrote about that Israel on October 7th utilized what they call the Hannibal Directive, which is Israel's military command is required to kill their own civilians in order to prevent them from being captured and taken hostage. So it's kind of come out that we don't truly know how many of the so-called atrocities that Hamas allegedly committed on October 7th were actually committed by Hamas, or were they actually committed by the Israeli occupation forces against their own people. And it seems likely that a large percentage of the mass death was caused by Israel itself.
Right, and this is a story that we see again and again and again in this conflict.
Well, it's like they want to use the atrocity of October 7th to dehumanize the Palestinians as a people, and to allow them to then justify any means necessary that they want to, destroy the whole of Gaza, essentially. And his
Right.
language of that, the clash of civilizations, that was something that goes back, when George W. Bush was president.
George W. Bush, right.
It was the neoconservatives said this is a clash of civilizations between Christian West and the Muslim East. And Netanyahu is almost taking it even further than that. He's going even more extreme than Bush and the neocons was saying. It's not even civilizations, because at least Bush was saying Islam is a civilization. Netanyahu is basically saying these Muslims, these aren't even civilized people. These are barbarians. So therefore, it's okay if we wipe them out.
Right, and it's I think you called it atrocity propaganda or something like that.
Yeah.
Because all of these atrocity stories, first you had the mass killing of babies that
Right.
President Biden discussed, which turned out to be a false story, completely false.
Right.
Then you had the rape as a tool of war, a weapon of war.
Right.
And that's increasingly now debunked. So each one of these atrocity claims are increasingly debunked again and again, and clearly being used for the purpose they're intended, which is to justify a genocide. And again, going back to sort of my issue about how our states created, how our nations like Palestine created, how was East Timor, how did that win independence? How did Algeria win independence? How did Ireland win independence? They all won independence, unfortunately, because there's no legal procedure that's easily available. There's no civil procedure. You can't get everyone to sign a petition and pay some money and create a nation. The only way to do it, unfortunately, is through military resistance and violence. And that's
right. Well, and that's the
world.
That is something that I think that not just Netanyahu, but all Zionists, whether they're liberal Zionists who think they're against Netanyahu because he's too extreme, but the entire idea that Israel and Palestine, or Israel and Hamas, Israel and Gaza, are two separate entities that are at war with each other. It's a false paradigm, because
yes,
it's yeah. I mean, it could be there in my mind. There's a difference between the violence of Hamas in resistance to being under siege and under occupation. I think that is different than the wholesale violence that the Israelis are inflicting on Gaza collectively. I think you can't really even compare the two.
Right. Some of the authors compare it to like slavery and when the Matt Turner slave revolts, when
Right.
black slaves, got off a plantation and committed acts of terror against white slave masters and so forth.
Right.
How do you even equate the two? That's not to say that terrorism or some sort of horrific acts of murder and rape and pillaging and mayhem and everything is not horrific and is not it's not recognized as being part of resistance, as you call it. In other words, to engage in resistance does not justify the use of mayhem, rape, hostages, torture, things like that. But it obviously it helps give some context to what's actually taking place here.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's try.
Stokely Carmichael uses a great line,
Wami
Ture, where he says, "If you were my slave and I was your master, and the only way you could be free and live as a free person and no longer as a complete slave, you'd have to shoot me.
Right.
What would you do? What would you do?
Right.
You just go on being a slave. I thought that was quite."
No, that's a very important point. And so the choice would be, do the people of Gaza want to live as slaves forever, or do they want to rise up and try to fight a resistance? And that's sort of the dilemma that was not their choice. That was the dilemma that the state of Israel and United States have imposed upon Gaza. So
right. And what strikes me about the speech, that my central claim about the whole speech, or problem with the whole speech, was that he discusses it as do all supporters of the current Likud regime that runs Israel and these Likud supporters. They describe it as a war, as if Gaza is a sovereign, independent country
right,
with a president and an army and a Supreme Court, and has declared war on the state of Israel that was just innocent.
Well, it's a contradiction, because at the same time, they deny that Palestine exists. They deny that the Palestinians are a people and that they have statehood. But then when they want to justify a massacre, then they suddenly pretend that Gaza is a state, or that Gaza is an independent entity with its own sovereignty, and that Hamas is a government that has its own sovereign power. When we both know that Hamas is sort of a governing body, but within a territory that is under military occupation by the Israelis. So ultimately,
so which one is it? I mean, it can't be both things. I mean, it can't be a sovereign entity which attacked Israel, minding its own business one day in the dark of night, and just led this horrific.
Right, and this is the propaganda that you hear from American Zionists all the time. They'll say, well, what would America do if Mexico attacked us, or what would America do if Canada attacked us? Completely erases the distinction that Canada is a sovereign state.
That's right.
It's not under America's military occupation, under siege. So they're sort of wanting to eliminate the brutal reality of what Israel is doing to Gaza.
Right. So, and there's not a word in Netanyahu's speech about the Palestinians, Palestinian self-determination, Palestinian statehood, the state of Palestine,
right,
and the future. And instead, on the one hand, it's this Palestinian state country with a Palestinian president, implying an independent, sovereign Palestinian state that attacked Israel in the dark of night and committed terrorist acts one night, against
out of the blue for no reason, with no context.
With no context. Yeah. And on the other hand, these same Likud Zionist leaders take the position: who are the Palestinians? What are the Palestinians? There are no Palestinians. That's a quote from Golda Meir. That's a classic quote, that Palestine does not exist, that there is no such thing as a Palestinian, and the whole idea of Palestine and Palestinians is a relatively recent sort of evolution. Back in the
As a
day,
national identity.
yeah, during the '67 war, they were just simply Arabs. They didn't have their Palestinian nationalism had not evolved to the state that it's in today. Today, Arabs are referred to as Palestinians, but it's sort of like the evolution of Africans or African Americans in the United States who were simply called Negro, and then slowly, and then next that changed to Black, and then that changed to African American. Wami Turek just simply refers to African Americans as Africans without the American, arguing that that Africans never really assimilated into American culture or society. So,
yeah, well, let's go to another clip from his speech. You want to look at something?
Yeah, let's
see what other things he had to say.
Friends, defeating our brutal enemies requires both courage and clarity. Clarity begins by knowing the difference between good and evil. Yet incredibly, many anti-Israel protesters, many choose to stand with evil. They stand with Hamas. They stand with rapists and murderers. They stand with people who came into the kibbutzim, into a home. The parents hid the children, the two babies in the attic, in a secret attic. They murder the families, the parents. They find the secret latch to the hidden attic, and then they murder the babies. These protesters stand with them. They should be ashamed of themselves.
See him referring to Palestinians and Palestine as some sort of separate entity, as something that's not part of Israel, as something that's not part of Israeli territory or occupied by Israel. It's been the longest, I believe it's the longest military occupation in modern history.
Yes.
So if they're not, and if there is no Palestine, and there are not no Palestinians who committed these so-called these horrific acts, again, many of which have been debunked. The acts of rape are debunked. The acts of burning and killing babies has been debunked. But even giving the argument.
Well, yeah, I mean, he knows that's debunked. I think he's saying this thing about the attic and the burning the baby. It's almost like he's kind of like trying to draw a parallel to the Nazi Holocaust, like Anne Frank hiding in the attic. So now these poor, helpless Jewish babies are hiding in the attic in the kibbutz while these evil, barbaric Muslims come in and murder them and kill the babies. And of course, we know from reporting that none of these things even happened that he's describing. But he's using this in a very calculated way to draw a parallel to the Holocaust, which then makes Israel the victim and Hamas and Palestine and Gaza the aggressor, which then can justify any mass murder he wants to commit against the entire people of Gaza.
You see, again, I keep hearkening back to this point of there is no Palestine. So who is this conflict with? Who took these actions and who defended these actions? I keep going back to the point of Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself. Who's Israel? Who's Israel? Israel is a country now with 7.4 million Arabs living in it who call themselves Palestinians. They are the majority of Israel, or Greater Israel, if you include these occupied Palestinian territories, West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza. Who's Israel? And what we're talking about here, if you want to, I would propose, and we could discuss it.
Yeah,
we're talking about Israelis fighting Israelis, or nationals of the same country fighting nationals of the same country who are distinguished by ethnicity, one Arab, one Jewish. Back in the day, it was predominantly white Jewish, predominantly Arab people of color, although Israel today has a substantial people of color population, African Israelis, Persian Israelis, and so forth. So
it's a what you're saying is that there's only one state that is a sovereign power over the entire territory.
That's my point. And therefore, that's why the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations has says, no, there is no right of self-defense against your own country. It would be, I would analogize it to even the United States when we had Watts and Harlem and Detroit, exploding in violence. well, we weren't invaded by a foreign country. Those were Americans and Americans, Black Americans and white Americans. Same thing here. We'll call them Israelis because that is the entity or the structure that exists today. Maybe
Right.
one day it'll be changed to Palestine, or maybe it'll be changed to Israel-Palestine. But what you're dealing with is with one structure, one entity with two groups, one predominantly white and Jewish, one people of color and Arab, who are in conflict. The Arabs call themselves, rightfully so, Palestinian because their nationalism has now expressed itself fully. They see themselves
Right.
as Palestinian, want to establish. Again, we don't know what kind of future Palestinians really want to establish for themselves. They may want a bicultural entity. They may want just a Palestinian entity. Well, we do know the claim of Palestine is Palestinians have been to create a secular democratic state, one state.
Right.
But it is, in fact, one state. So
it's a one state that is an apartheid state, though. Is not a one state where everyone of all religions have an equal right to live in the state and participate.
And that's critical, because the claim of supporters of the current regime in Israel is just the opposite, that, Israel is a democratic state, everyone has equal civil and political rights, but clearly it's one entity that includes Jerusalem and the West Bank and
Right.
Gaza. And Gaza is not a country, it's not a state. You cannot. Gaza is either a part of that one structure, call it State of Israel today, or there's no such thing as a stateless territory. It has to be a part of another country. There was a time when Gaza was under Egyptian control, apparently.
Yes. After 48.
Or maybe it's part of Mexico or Italy, or I don't mean to be facetious, but it has to be part of a nation state. And the only nation state it can be a part of is the State of Israel. That is the occupying force. And the lead jurist in the world on this, who I believe is passed, is Yoram Dinstein from the University of Tel Aviv, who spent his life studying occupation and occupation law. Israel is the occupying sovereign. They call it sovereign, like a king. The font of authority. The font of authority is the State of Israel over Gaza, and so Israel does not have a right to defend itself against itself. That's what's happening here. So that's why there's no right of self-defense. It was not attacked by Mexico or Italy or Egypt or some other sovereign state. It was attacked from within, with two peoples in conflict within a common state structure that we call the State of Israel today. What it will ultimately become is unknown. And that goes to issues like, well, what do you do about this? We need two states. Well, then you're getting into those, which raises a whole bunch of other questions, because partition, which was an older way of dealing with ethnic conflict, that, for example, British India was partitioned into a Muslim Pakistan and a Hindu India to solve the conflict, the internal conflict of India, today is being questioned. There are movements calling for the reunification of India as one state with two groups, because it hurts the country economically. And we know that countries that have multiple ethnicities within a common structure do better, are stronger. And what do they say? Diversity is the spice of life. It gives strength to nations.
And I think the term that I would, the way that I would think about this is like, if you look at the question of nationalism, I personally diverge from the Zionist point of view, that I do not think Jews are a nation. I think it's a fiction, because Jews, in my view, are a religious group. And Jews have lived in diaspora, meaning we've lived dispersed throughout all the countries of the world. So if you're a Jew who lives in America, my nationality is American and I am Jewish, but I'm not Jewish by nationality. If you're a Jew living in Germany, you're a German Jew. If you're a Jew living in Iran, you're an Iranian Jew. So this idea of Zionism was to create this fictional, bringing all the Jews into one common nationality and imposing them by force onto Palestine. And I think because of that, the Zionist idea of nationality is illegitimate. It just cannot be sustained except through pure force, through pure military might, and historically through the alliance of Israel with colonial imperial powers, first the British Empire, and then after World War II, the US Empire. So I don't think it's a legitimate country, because a country has to be organic. It has to actually evolve from the people that it lives among. And Israel is in a current, complete total state of war, not only against, as you say, its own population of Palestinians, but every country that is its neighboring country is in a permanent state of war. So I think the only thing I would advocate for is de-Zionization, which I would say, maybe making up a word there, decolonization or de-Zionization, of just removing the Zionist ideology, and the Jewish population that lives in Palestine would have to become integrated organically into the region with their neighboring Arab, Muslim, and Christian brethren, instead of being a force that is imposed upon them from above through military might, through alliance with colonial powers. Because to me, that's just, that's a recipe for endless war and conflict. And Jewry would never be an organic part of Palestine if that was the case.
Yeah, it's well stated, and it goes to another issue that I look at in my own work, which is how do you protect minority groups within state structures, generally speaking, and then what would be the remedy in this situation? You have to remember that Israel was established, recognized in 48.
Yes.
Is that right? So
48,
we do not have the benefit of the development of human rights law and this sort of new approach to how states deal with multiple ethno-racial groups hosted by the same regime or state within their, that reside within the state. So we have that today. And we have structures or forms that can allow different ethno-racial, religious, and linguistic groups to have their protection, constitutional protection, even protection, language.
It's a very good point that also historically that happened after World War II, when the Holocaust was, revealed to the world. And I think there was a large number of displaced Jewish refugees. And I think creating Israel was one way for the European powers to push the Jewish question out of Europe and impose it upon Palestine. So that instead of having to
exactly right. But again, what given your sort of theorization or actual analysis, I think it's not so much a theory which you're explaining; it's more actual analysis of what actually took place. Establishing a Jewish homeland, say for lack of a better word, Judenstan, say in Central Europe, in part of Germany or part of former Soviet Union, part of the current day Russian Federation, might have made a lot of sense, because there were organic whole Yiddish Jewish communities who spoke their own language, Yiddish, who had a cultural, both a religious and a cultural sort of, integration, or, identity. And given the war and what happened, the Holocaust, that would have made sense. By the way, just as an aside, and I don't want to go off, the Roma people were also not genocided in World War II. We've talked about this before in prior shows. The Roma called their genocide the devouring. And the numbers of Roma who were annihilated by the Nazis are still unknown. But you'll notice the Roma did not strive for statehood, because they're a traveling people. They're travelers, so they don't believe in a sedentary national state idea, which is interesting. And they're still brutally, like Jews, they were brutally persecuted in Europe.
Okay, so let's pull up another point in the speech. Netanyahu was going on about about the International Criminal Court, and he was comparing it to a blood libel against the Jews.
When the blood libels against the Jewish state come from people who wear fancy silk robes and speak in lofty tones about law and justice, here's a case in point. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has shamefully accused Israel of deliberately starving the people of Gaza. This is utter, complete nonsense. It's a complete fabrication. Israel has enabled more than 40,000 aid trucks to enter Gaza. That's 500,000 tons of food. And that's more than 3,000 calories for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. If there are Palestinians in Gaza who aren't getting enough food, it's not because Israel is blocking it, it's because Hamas is stealing it.
So he goes on and on with these sort of standard talking points where he blames every humanitarian catastrophe that has befallen Gaza. He blames it on the people of Gaza themselves and denies Israeli responsibility for that. Of course, we know, look at the horrific pictures and images we see out of Gaza. The rise of malnutrition, people are dying of starvation. I was just recently reading that there's an outbreak of polio that has.
Right. That's the latest. That's the latest.
It's so bad that it's actually Israel is afraid that polio is going to spread through their own people because it's so bad that you can't contain it just within Gaza.
Well, this goes back to our theme. You're separating the two peoples.
Separating it out, right?
They both belong to the same country,
right?
And whatever the country's employing against its own people of ethnic Arab Palestinian origin is going to affect the same people of religious white Jewish origin. Doesn't matter. It's one country, and if they're spreading polio all over, I don't even think there's toilets in Gaza.
Well, most people do not have sanitation. They don't have
any sanitation. It's just rife with every kind of disease. That's one of the strategies of the genocide.
Well, it's also quite disgusting that he brings up that Israel is allowing these aid trucks in, because from my understanding, when the genocide started, Israel put the entire Gaza Strip under complete and total siege of all food. And when they finally did allow a few aid trucks to trickle in, there's been multiple reports where Palestinians have been running towards the aid trucks, and then they just start shooting and killing the Palestinian civilians who are trying to get the aid. They've also killed all these aid workers. They've killed UN workers. They've killed people at refugee camps. They've killed reporters and journalists. So the level of destruction is almost on an unimaginable scale of any war since. And
of course, prior to October 7th, you had this situation where Gaza, where the Israeli government would joke, and again in a pre-genocidal way, about putting Gazans on a diet,
right?
Putting them on a diet by limiting food supply. And every UN report that talks about conditions, social conditions, environmental conditions of Gaza state that Gaza is a territory that is unfit for human habitation.
Yes.
It's also a territory where half the population are kids, and so on and so forth. And it is not a stateless territory. The font of authority for Gaza is the state of Israel. It's not Mexico. It's not Italy. It's not Spain. It's the state of Israel. That's the only UN sovereign member state that has the font of authority, the sovereignty over Gaza. There's no such thing as a stateless territory. Gaza is not a country. Gaza is not stateless. It has to be attached to a country.
Right. And that's a big point. Now, what do you make of this whole? I think we might want to explain for some of our viewers who are not Jewish this claim about the blood libel. Because the blood libel was during medieval times in Europe. There were claims that Jews would kill Christian babies and bake their blood and use it to make matzah for Passover and things like that. So the blood libel, it refers to, like nowadays, it symbolically means any false accusation used against the Jewish people to justify anti-Semitism, to justify the murder of Jews. And so when Netanyahu accuses the International Criminal Court of a blood libel, he's accusing international law. He's accusing the court system of being anti-Semitic, of facilitating the murder of Jews, right?
Yes, and this is a common tact of authoritarian rulers to, first of all, to attack international law, because international law acts as a check on independent, otherwise sovereign states that can do what the hell they please without any repercussion. So authoritarian rulers will attack international law. Hitler attacked international law. During I hate to use those analogies because they're so exploited to promote political ends. But this is an attack. Look, international criminal law, the International Criminal Court that Netanyahu attacks. He's attacking the indictment and the arrest of Hamas leaders who are accused of war crimes. So he's already said the International Criminal Court and its effort to arrest Hamas leaders and prosecute Hamas leaders is doing a wrong thing, because it's a court that's filled with blood libel and doing all this, making all these crazy attacks. That criminals are constantly attacking judges, courts, domestic courts, state courts, federal courts, international courts. This is a common theme you hear through all criminals. There were Rwandan officials who were arrested and prosecuted in the Rwandan genocide, Hutu genocide of the Tutsis. You'll have the same approach. The Serbian leaders who were prosecuted by the court will make these same claims that they're fighting terrorists. So this is not an unusual response of war criminals who are protesting their arrest. If you really think Hamas is a bad terrorist organization, many countries recognize Hamas. Other countries do not. They consider them on the terrorist list. That's not my concern as an international sort of lawyer, I guess.
Right.
My concern is that the laws be upheld. If people are committing war crimes, whether it be non-state actors like a political association or social association, Hamas is not a government. It's not a sovereign state. There's no president that
Right.
But again, if members of the Hamas organization are committing war crimes, they should be arrested and prosecuted. And the Likud leaders should also be arrested and prosecuted for committing potential acts
What you're saying, though, is that they can't have it both ways. Israel can't have it both ways, right? But and also Israel Netanyahu is claiming that Israel is civilized. It's a civilized country, but he's also decrying what historians consider one of the traditional marks of civilization, which is the legal system, which is
law. Yeah, the rule of law.
So it's sort of like, this is one of the points that Vladimir Putin makes that I like so much, where Putin always mocks this, how the West says we believe in a rules-based international order. And Putin points out it's not true, because countries like Israel and the United States can violate the rules, violate the international law at any time that they want to. And then they impose that law onto others to restrict other states. So that's sort of what Netanyahu himself is saying here, is that international law is not binding on Israel. Israel should be free to attack and kill whoever they want.
Yeah, and this is the problem with international law generally, because international law has a very they call it soft law. It's a kind of an advisory law, because what is international law? It's laws that sovereign states agree to adhere to participate in voluntarily.
And it doesn't have any teeth then.
So it does. Well, it has teeth. I mean, look, there are people in jail. There's Hutu officials sitting in a Hague jail. So it has teeth. They haven't gotten,
but there's a limitation, because if we live in a world where the superstructure is a superstructure of international law that was created after World War II, but at the same time, after World War II, the U.S. military became an imperialist power that has erected an empire over the whole planet. And so there's a contradiction. How can one country be an empire while claiming we follow international law? because the US empire violates the sovereignty of all the other countries in the world. And so that's a big contradiction. You can't have imperialism and international law and democracy. Those two things are in contradiction.
You can't. And again, international law is something that evolves over time. It becomes stronger and stronger. It becomes, it's like you say, it's a hallmark of human civilization. When you refer to civilization, the hallmark of it is things like the international prosecution of crimes against humanity. That's the purpose of the International Criminal Court. Now, Netanyahu attacks that hallmark of civilization. Civilized nations, in fact, the overwhelming majority, there's only a handful of nations that that are not members of the International Criminal Court. A few states, Iran, Israel, North Korea, United States, even the Russian Federation was a member, but they recently changed their status, probably based on what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, and I think the difference between that is Iran, the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, and Russian Federation. I think they are starting to pull away from those things because their perception is that they're being unfairly targeted by international law, while the West, the United States, Israel, those countries are being shielded and immune from it.
Right, but again, even most Western states are members. In other words, it's just the USA, North Korea,
right,
a few rogue states. I consider these states rogue states. Although you're right, I think the Russian action, the Russian Federation action, was a response to the fact that we're not participating in the International Criminal Court, that we're not giving it the jurisdiction.
Yeah, and I would quibble with the distinction of North Korea and Iran and Russia being rogue states, because I don't think those states are. I think they don't behave as rogue states. They're countries that are under attack, under siege, under sanction by the West, by the rogue state of Israel, by the rogue state of the United States. Right. So they're countries that are victimized. I mean, North Korea has been we've been at war with North Korea since the 1950s.
Right.
They've been under severe sanctions. Iran is under sanctions, and Russia is under sanctions. So those countries are, in my opinion, not rogue states. They're the victims of an imperialist world order that is seeking to destroy them. So I think we have to be careful to notice the difference in a country that is a victim of imperialism versus a country that is the perpetrator of imperialism. And I think that's the distinction.
Right. That's a good point. And to define rogue, I'm using it in terms of membership, signatory to the Rome Statute, and membership in international bodies like the International Criminal Court. In other words, the recognition of these bodies as a hallmark of civilization and a set of standards that all countries are going to adhere to. And that's how I'm using rogue. The few handful of countries that don't recognize those institutions. But as you say, it's more of a response in the case of the countries you're like.
Iran. Well, we don't want to go too far down into the topic of, we've discussed Russia on the show before too, but right. I think that there is a rising multipolar alliance between countries like Russia, right. China, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela. These are countries that are in resistance to the Western imperialist global order that has been in control of the world for centuries. And right. So I think that is where Palestine fits into that question, is that Palestine is an emerging focal point that exposes the hypocrisy of the West's claim at being civilized, the West's claim at being democratic and based on international law. And so I think that these other countries that are rising up in power and starting to stand up to the West, I think that that can actually make international law real. If we have countries who are respected, their sovereignty is respected, instead of just allowing one country, the US, and its lackeys to sort of bully and intimidate and dominate every other country in the world for its own profit.
And not only ignore international law, but refuse to participate in it. In other words, Netanyahu attacks it, attacks the international prosecution of crimes against humanity. How could you be the prime minister of the state of Israel, created it out of the ashes of the genocide, the Nazi genocide?
Well, created by the UN.
Yeah, and created by the United Nations in response to the genocide. What do they call it? A crime from hell. And then attack it in that manner. It's just hard to.
Well, it goes to what Israel's role is in Western imperialism, and Netanyahu makes this clear by continually bringing up Iran. And he says multiple times throughout the speech that Iran is really what's behind Hamas in Gaza, and that if Israel doesn't go to war with Iran, then America will be next, right? Like October 7th happened to us first, and if we don't go out and take out Iran, then Iran's going to attack America.
Right.
So he's basically trying to drag America into a regional war, similar to how we went into Iraq, we went into Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. He's trying to do that same thing, but with Iran. And so it's like Israel is basically this attack dog, of America. But he's getting so aggressive that it's almost like he's going out of control. Because there are some forces in the American state that want some level of appeasement with Iran, some sort of negotiated agreement with Iran rather than an all-out war.
Right.
And Netanyahu is trying to drag us into a full-blown regional war against Iran, which I don't think anything could be more dangerous.
Nothing could be more dangerous. And it's an old story we've seen played out again and again and again in contemporary history. Not only with regard to the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq, but prior to that, during the Vietnam War, the constant attempts to say that the war in Vietnam was just a proxy war between communist China and the United States. In other words, the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, were controlled by communist China and the Soviet Union as well. And this was essentially a war between the nuclear powers, communist China, the People's Republic of China, Soviet Union, and the United States.
Right.
It's constant. I think even in the Middle East, in the Battle of Algiers, in the Algerian Revolution, Egypt was the old Iran. Egypt headed by Gamal Nasser, and so everything was being promoted by Egypt and Arab nationalism. So this is an old story we've seen played out again and again, and it's wrong and it's incorrect. In Vietnam, the irony of it was the Vietnamese and the Chinese were in a constant state of war throughout their entire history, and so it's just an absurd idea, But that was the idea that was promoted, and you're seeing it again, and it's very dangerous and pushes us into the brink of global thermonuclear war, which no one talks about. None of the Democrats anymore. John F. Kennedy used to talk about that all the time, but you don't see.
Let's look at this other. There's one more clip in this speech I wanted to show you, and this is, I believe, Netanyahu talking about his idea of like what his plan for the future of Gaza will look like.
The day after we defeat Hamas, a new Gaza can emerge. My vision for that day is of a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Israel does not seek to resettle Gaza, but for the foreseeable future, we must retain overriding security control there to prevent the resurgence of terror, to ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel.
So there it is again.
Gaza should have a civilian administration run by Palestinians who do not seek to destroy Israel. That's not too much to ask.
Yeah. So what do you make of that statement?
I mean, it's just
what do you think that's his bold vision, his bold plan? He didn't say he wants a Palestinian
it goes
state.
again and again to this idea that somehow Gaza is this foreign country and Israel has a right to defend itself against this stateless territory called.
But even so, he said that Israel for the foreseeable future will have to maintain what did he say, like control over Gaza.
Correct.
So he's denying that Gaza can have sovereignty.
Correct.
But he wants some kind of de-radicalized, Palestinian administrative apparatus to administer things in Gaza while Israel maintains control over it. It seems kind of like similar to what they do in the West Bank with the Palestinian Authority that was created out of the Oslo Accords in the 90s, where they have a kind of fig leaf of a artifice of a government that is essentially just an administrative apparatus that is subservient to Israel, that is the dominating, occupying power over it. And it seems like he kind of wants to do that to Gaza as well.
Right. I mean, just I don't like to be academic, but I mean, this goes to this idea of, what kind of state structure should exist in this singular structure. Because all of these areas, whether it's Jerusalem or West Bank or Gaza, are all part of the same state structure with Israel. And again, I don't like to do whataboutism, but I look to countries like South Africa under the Afrikaners and Afrikaner apartheid in South Africa for solutions. And their solution, the only solution, was a kind of democratization or decolonization, if you want to call it that, of the territories based upon universal democratic principles of one person, one vote, one person, one vote. That's the only possible solution to this situation. And again, and to our Jewish friends, we're Jewish, and full disclosure, the Israeli territory is 7.54 million Arab Palestinians. Let's acknowledge their national identity, and 7 million Jews, the Jewry. So the majority, like in South Africa, with Black South Africans who were controlled or subjugated by white South Africans in Bantustans. So what he's doing is perpetrating the idea of Bantustans, that somehow the people of color, the Arab Palestinian, will live in these segregated areas with some kind of an administrative governance that's acceptable to the ruling, dominating ethno-religious group, in this case, Jewry, in the same manner that the white Afrikaners, the Dutch Afrikaner South Africans ruled Black South Africans in these Bantustans. And it's just, that's why but this is my own personal view, is like, that's why I oppose the idea of partitioning the territory into separate or segregated states, one Jewish and one Arab Palestinian.
Right.
And support what the South Africans did, which is one state based upon the universal democratic principle of one person, one vote.
Right. I completely agree. And I think even worse than what Netanyahu is saying is that I don't think it's going to be just some kind of Palestinian administration that's going to come into Gaza. I think their plan is, I think, much more insidious than that. I think that they would like to destroy and remove as many Palestinians as humanly possible from existence through mass killing, through just destroying their way of life. And I think that they probably would have liked to push them into Egypt, just remove them, and then take that territory and sort of rebuild it. Since they've destroyed the entire territory, all the infrastructure is destroyed, they'd like to rebuild it and, turn that into prime real estate, beachfront property.
Right. And you hear the Trump people joke about this, that they want to basically, in realty terms, in the business world, they call that gentrification, where you take poor people, move them out of the area, and redevelop and build luxury condominiums and luxury apartments and
Right.
destroy all the affordable housing and where all the poor people live. And
There's no way that can be accomplished without billions and billions and billions of dollars of investment to rebuild Gaza. I mean, because the level of destruction is just completely off the charts.
I think, I mean, a pure real estate gentrification plan would be just that.
Yeah.
I mean, they can only relocate the populace or annihilate the populace, and so
Right.
they are attempting to annihilate. They've already annihilated apparently 10%. I think you sent me the
Right.
Lancet.
Well, there was a Lancet Medical Journal.
Right.
Well, the official death toll is I think close to 35,000-40,000, which is just actual confirmed casualties. But the Lancet did this study where they estimated all of the I don't know the exact term they use, but like deaths that are not direct military casualties,
Right.
but indirect death.
Indirect casualties of war. So that could be disease, that could be infection, that could
Starvation.
be starvation, all kinds of.
Right. So that they put the number at, I believe it was more than 100,000 already.
Yeah, 186,000.
180,000. Yeah.
So that's roughly 10% of the population.
Yeah.
Now, also there were the reports that Netanyahu was negotiating with African countries, Chad and I think Rwanda, Chad and Rwanda, to relocate the Palestinians. Again, almost like realtors gentrifying a neighborhood, trying to take the low-income tenants and pay them off to move. To some.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is what the Palestinians refer to it as the Nakba, which in 1948 they refer to that as the ethnic cleansing that started the foundation of the state of Israel, and this is like the second version of the Nakba 2.0.
Yeah, Nakba, and this goes to your point that Israel is not an organic structure; it's an imposed structure on an existing indigenous population. And and often the way national resistance movements evolve is in reaction. So Palestinian nationalism as a concept, may not have been as fully formed in 1948 as it is, say, today. It takes time because you're this indigenous population, ethnic Arab peoples, and who are you? What are you? Again, look at the civil rights movement in the United States. The way African American people, didn't have a national identity initially. They were considered they were identified by their race, Negro. They had no national affiliation. The way Italian Americans or Jewish Americans or German Americans are, So the same thing with Arab, I guess you'd say Israelis or Arab Palestinians. They had no national. The nationalist idea took time to evolve and develop, and it has fully evolved.
Right.
Even to the point where
I want to turn to one more thing, if you will indulge me.
Yes.
Let's look at. So we talked a lot about Netanyahu, but while Netanyahu was speaking to Congress, outside was a massive protest.
Correct.
And there were thousands and thousands of people, including a large percentage of American Jews, led by groups like Jewish Voices for Peace, that were protesting against Netanyahu. And this is a statement that was put out by the presumptive Democratic Party nominee Kamala Harris, where she condemns the protests. And she says here, yesterday at the Union Station in Washington, D.C., we saw despicable acts by unpatriotic protesters and dangerous hate-fueled rhetoric. I condemn any individuals associating with the brutal terrorist organization Hamas, which has vowed to annihilate the state of Israel and kill Jews. Pro-Hamas graffiti and rhetoric is abhorrent, and we must not tolerate it in our nation. So this statement very clearly aligns Kamala Harris on the side of the Israel lobby, on the side of Zionism, on the side of continuing the genocide in Gaza, condemning the protesters exercising their First Amendment rights to freedom of speech. And it is also playing to something that Netanyahu said in his speech, which Netanyahu claims that the protesters were bought and paid for by Iran. So Kamala Harris is doing the same thing that the far right is doing. She's condemning anyone who's opposed to this genocide. So what do you think? Is that going to hurt her in the election? As far as
because these politicians, I hate to use that term, they're quite skillful, and they'll change their profile very quickly. Clearly, Kamala Harris is carving out a space now where she's distinguishing herself from Joe Biden. She's trying to say that she is concerned about how Israel is prosecuting the war. She makes it clear that Israel has a right to self-defense, which again we've reviewed that question.
Right.
Under international law, you cannot defend yourself against yourself. You have no right of self-defense against your own country. But let's not go back.
Right, but she's providing. So you're saying she's trying to provide some limit to how Israel conducts the war.
Yeah, she's critical. She refused to attend I believe she refused to attend the Netanyahu address.
She didn't attend the address, but then she met with him in private.
Privately.
She issues the statement condemning the protests at the same time.
Right. So she's trying to, on the one hand, sort of play both poles, or at least, but I think you're right. I think that she clearly will, and again, yeah, she will clearly continue the current policy, but she'll try to draw some delineation, saying she is concerned about genocide, and she would like to see, a little friendlier type of genocide.
Well, yeah, it reminds me of that Neil Young song where he says, "There's a kindler, gentler machine gun hand."
Yeah, right.
It's that the Democrats and Kamala Harris is trying to appeal to the voters who are concerned about the genocide in Gaza, but they're not going to stop the genocide or actually condemn Israel. They're just wanting the optics to change, to make it look a little nicer and cleaner, right?
Correct. And that's what she's doing, and that's what she's clearly doing. But at the same time, she's come under attack for doing that, for trying to even portray different optics. I think the Republicans attack her for showing, or Netanyahu attacked her, or she was attacked for showing there's some, what they call, space between the United States and Israel. That there's some space between.
Yeah, and this leads to a big contradiction. Donald Trump, the movement that he is behind is the MAGA movement, which is, America first. And Trump, to his credit, when he ran originally in 2016, he did voice a lot of criticisms of the neoconservatives and the imperialist wars. But at the same time, now he's giving support to Netanyahu and the state of Israel. So how can you be America first while wanting Israel to dictate our foreign policy, to allow Israel to continue to receive our tax dollars? It seems like in the conservative movement, they can't claim to be America first while giving a blank check to Israel and allowing Israel to control so much of what happens in our Middle East policy.
But I think using the analysis which you eloquently stated, this idea of an imperial, this idea as an American empire, Israel plays a critical strategic role, and Trump is very much promoting that role. And if anything, his argument is that the genocide should be more extreme, but conducted in a more extreme genocidal fashion, but in a quicker fashion. Trump constantly talks about that Israel has to hurry up and, quote unquote, finish the job.
Right.
Or maybe that's Harris who says, one of them says we have to finish the job. So in other words, commit the genocide more quickly, kill more people more quickly. But by the way, what have they been at war for? This conflict's been going on, well, since 1948, but in the most recent,
and the incursions that Israel makes into Gaza have been going on for the last 20 years.
20 years, that's right. Is Israel winning this war? so-called, and war against whom, and two, is it winning, or is it winnable? Because if you're at war with an entire population, how do you win that war other than annihilation, genocide, or ethnic cleansing? Move the entire population out of the country.